fundamentally, if we were to exist, if we were not to go extinct, by 2035, all the businesses that are present today will look very different.
You are listening to Understanding the Future podcast. I am the host Punit Gandhi, and this podcast is developed in association with Climate Center for Cities under the National Institute of Urban Affairs and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. This is a podcast where we discuss about the future of work in the field of climate change, urban development, innovation, and sustainability with the help of leaders and visionaries working on ground as well as in the top management of public and private sector. Our objective is to better understand the future so that we can be prepared and intervene to enable climate actions in the urban areas. Hello everyone, I am Punit Gandhi, the host of the podcast Understanding the Future. And today we have with us Abhilasha Purwar, founder and CEO of Blue Sky Analytics. She will help us understand the future of environmental data. Welcome to the show, Abhilasha Purwar. It's great to have you on our show. If you could just give us a brief background about yourself as well as Blue Sky Analytics, it will be, I think, a good start for everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Puneet. So I'll start with a brief background of Blue Sky, which emerged out of a bunch of people saying that enough air pollution is enough. We got to do something about it. And that was literally the first, starting point. Since we came from a technology and engineering background, we wanted to do something about it in that domain. But it was like, let's just try something. And this was about June, July, summer of 2018, as we started going forward on that path, we realized that there was a pretty massive environmental data gap and you can't solve what you don't know. So we really wanted to plug ourselves into that place. That's also where we felt that we can create maximum impact by leveraging data and technology, satellites, IoT, AI, sort of throwing buzzwords here. But when you come look at the environmental domain, like a lot of these buzzwords are thrown around all the time, and it's fintech, consumer tech, health tech. But within the environment climate change community, especially in India, we are still pretty non-profit domain, maybe some sort of activism and everything. And we haven't come to that technology and innovation. And I think, I don't even know when was the last innovation in air pollution as a segment. So we really wanted to get in there. And over the course of past 1.5 years, it's been a pretty, rocket ship journey. And for everybody who told us in the beginning that maybe you should register as a nonprofit, or maybe people don't really care about air pollution, what you're doing, Abhilasha, or climate change, there's no business there, there's no monetization there. I feel, what is technology going to do about climate change? How will technology solve climate change? Like all those words. I think we've pretty much proved our point there, which was that, in 1.5 years, we've grown from a team of about 4 people to 20 people. And everybody from the initial 4 people still is the part of the team. That's a testament of the success. We started as an air pollution data group, which was playing around with ground sensor data. And now we play around with terabytes of satellite data. So in 1.5 years, that shows the kind of caliber and skill and technological caliber that we have developed, like working on that kind of architectural framework, those kinds of services. Just from an engineering perspective, some of our initial engineers are like, I can't even imagine the kind of coding I'm doing in 1.5 years. Like 1 year ago, I was like finding it challenging to make like a website. Today, I can build a Postgres cluster on AWS in like a week. That's tremendous growth for somebody who's 24, 25 years of age and fresh out of college. And that is a testament to the fact that when you throw complex problem to young people and you give them enough courage and ability and just enable them to solve it, they actually rise up to the occasion. And that's what happened. Today Blue Sky Analytics is a seed-funded geospatial data intelligence startup. aka we analyze a lot of satellite data, and we primarily distill environmental insights from that crude satellite data for various kinds of applications. From, let's say, you are a house owner or you want to buy a house and you want to figure out, what is the groundwater underneath you, what is the biggest landfill site near your house, how much are the streets around you safe and lit, You can just reach out to us and we can give you all of this data. Or if you're a large insurance company and you want to figure out like flood and drought risk in a particular locality, reach out to us. We can give it to you. We charge hefty for some of those services because I think they're very, very worthy. And some of our data sets are pretty awesome. And we work very hard and in a collaborative fashion with the scientific and the climate science community to build out these things. So it's not that, this is a work in silo. For ages, scientists have done this, but it was staying only in the scientific domain and not coming into the layperson domain. And that's where we came in. So that's Blue Sky Analytics, long short of it. My background is also funny. So I come from a technology background. I graduated from IIT in 2012 with a specialization in sort of nanotechnology. Didn't end up doing anything in it. I graduated out and got this amazing job at Jameel Poverty Action Lab. Very great opportunity, and I'm so happy I picked that opportunity over other very high paying opportunities I had in the oil industry, because that was like the best decision ever at that time. I was just 21 years old, and I ended up working with Jairam Ramesh and Rohini Pandey and some very senior environmental economist, the environment minister himself, for about 3 years on different environmental policies and energy policies across India. I traveled, met all sorts of officials from the local environmental inspector, local pollution inspector, to the principal secretary in MOEF, or a small industry, or a small steel industry or a textile industry with hardly 50 crores of turnover and 20 employees, to large chemical factories, large power plants and cement plants. And I traveled across India, met a lot of those managers and everything. So really understood why were things happening the way the things were happening? Why was pollution a problem? How do you balance out economic development and environmental interest as well? Went to study environmental management in Yale after that as a Fulbright scholar, so that I could build up some more hard skills. And went to study public policy. That was my agenda, but graduated and I was working in a private equity firm. So you can probably see my arc in 2 years. I sort of really grasped the role of innovation and technology and startups and entrepreneurs in changing sort of the systems which are locked in this sense of inertia. That's what I felt. So I felt that obviously policy is a framework to shift things, but entrepreneurs and innovation is also a big, massive framework to shift things. So I wanted to operate in the second one. Then I graduated, worked with a lot of entrepreneurs and invested about $175 million in other companies and other projects. And then I thought it was time to get same level of investment into my products and my companies, and moved back to India. Again, a great decision, because I would say India is probably one of the really great places for entrepreneurial activity. I know the ease of doing business is kind of challenging. A lot of people have enough to complain about. We cannot undermine the kind of human capital that you will find here. There is a real passion and real sort of skill in the labor market here. And if you can leverage that and direct that energy towards complex problems, you have pretty good way to go.
You work all around data, and specifically, as you mentioned, satellite data. Is that the only source, or do you also gather data from other sources apart from satellite?
No, we're essentially a big data company. We focus on satellite data. So yes, 50-60% data that we play around with is satellite data, which often has to be supplemented with ground monitoring data. So a lot of IoT sensors or just physical experiment data as well. And a lot of just data from internet, you have to scrape off, let's say, traffic data for making certain models better, or location data for getting insights on something. So let's say 65 to 70% satellite data, supported by other ancillary data, either IoT or from just general publicly available data sets.
Yeah. And so what are the big challenges in getting this data? Because one thing is satellite data, I'm assuming that comes from specific websites and all, but ground data, I think, might be much more challenging on these lines to get. So what are those challenges, if you can just let us know?
I mean, if you have really good team of engineers, and data is not a challenge. That's one of our capabilities. I think we are very good data aggregators, collectors. And once the data set is out there, either we purchase it or we get into a partnership, or if it's free and openly available, then we ingest it. But that's just one of our major capabilities.
I think then that's quite a good start, because data, generally getting the data is one of the most difficult tasks. Then you can start analyzing it. Might be like with the engineers, it might be much more easier to do.
Actually,
No,
with engineers, getting data is also very easy. So something that we found was that, data scientists, or typically people who were, I mean, even this happens in India today also. A lot of
yeah,
times people apply for a role of data analyst or data scientist with us,
yeah,
and then you go to them and then their data analyst skills is Excel, which is not exactly data analysis skills. It's
yeah,
no. So something, we realized that there was engineering and data is two different things, and there was a mismatch there.
yeah,
Engineers, like especially developers, are really good in collecting large quantities of data, putting them on large databases, and writing scripts to do a lot of that in automatized fashion. And
yeah,
those engineers were not available in a lot of research organizations, which were ending up playing with those data sets.
yeah,
So our role essentially became that we are going to have our engineers who will collect, clean all this crude data and all this messy data for you, and we will organize it in really, really clean formats where
yeah,
somebody like even a Puneet Gandhi, who may or may not know how to scrape off or write certain scripts or something, but you can get access to, let's say, air quality data by just writing 2 lines of codes.
oh, wow.
And you can do your own analysis, and in some cases we even started to make embeds which are like pre-cooked visual embeds for you. So if, let's say, you're a journalist, then you don't need to go and do your own data analysis because your
Yeah,
job is journalism. Let us do it. So finding that what are some of those repeatable tasks that a lot of people are doing in a fairly sub-optimized fashion.
yeah,
And so there's a lot of value lost there. We can do it in a more optimal fashion because we are then essentially doing it for tens of thousands of people. And then we can give you something very simple, and then you can do your work. So essentially enabling, whether it's a policymaker, a journalist, a researcher, a financial analyst, a insurance analyst, a supply chain analyst, to
yeah,
do what they need to do
yeah,
while we take care of the headache of all the satellites and ground sensors and cleaning and parsing,
yeah.
you know. Yeah.
Okay. So environmental data over here is air pollution, is one of the major things. Then you also do forest fires and stubble burning. Anything else that you specifically kind of get from these data sets?
We get a lot actually. So that's the thing. Like initially we were working on air pollution. Then we went to
Yeah,
satellites and we were like, oh my God, this is a freaking gold mine. What
yeah,
all can you do with satellites? So for 3 months, we totally forgot, my co-founder, my brother and I totally forgot about that, we had an air pollution business. We became just like satellite nerds. And, I think, and that's one thing about Indian kids, you're nerd at heart. So you're like,
yeah,
ooh, so much. And we just studied the literature of what all is possible with satellites, like nothing else. No
yeah,
use case, nothing. We're just like, what is the realm of possibility? And
yeah,
because sometimes what happens is, and especially that happens with the government, the existing investor circle, the existing, sorry to being a slightly ageist, but existing set of decision makers who are typically above 50 and are
yeah,
not that well tuned with what are the realm of possibilities with the new technologies and new data sets, is
yeah,
that you just don't know what can be simply done. Like you don't know what you don't know, right?
yeah,
And so we spent that time and we were like completely blown away by what all can be executed.
yeah,
And then we were like, so you can actually do, we will start, we are obviously focused on air right now, but
yeah.
then in the long run, we'll do a lot of work on water and on land and extreme heat. So the idea is essentially to build a global environmental data stack and a global climate risk analyzing tool for every latitude, longitude of the planet in
Okay.
a temporal fashion. So I would want to give you information on water, on soil quality, on heat, temperatures, everything. I'm your environmental data guy. So it's going to take
Yeah,
time. I will not become like the environmental data person on day one.
yeah.
Rome was not built in a day. But, 2021, 2022, I think we'll be able to pull off most of that work.
Okay. And what kind of difference do you see between satellite data and ground data in terms of accuracy, or do you need to correlate them a lot to make sure that what is more accurate and what is less accurate?
See, so ground data is a micro picture.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's essentially like asking a Bilasha like if she likes coffee or tea.
Yeah.
And satellite data is a macro picture. So it's essentially asking a lot of like 30-year-old females if they like coffee or tea. That's like some simpler, very layman way of giving difference. Satellites take a snapshot from sort of top down, while sensor data is bottom up. Obviously, sensor data, or by sensor I mean SEN, the ground monitor data, it's not spatially continuous. You can't get it for every part of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, how many sensors will you really put? So what you get is like fairly accurate, fairly high resolution information of one spot. With satellites, you get is relatively low resolution information of lots and lots of spots. Now, if you're able to build a correlation metric between the two of them, which is fairly accurate, or keep on improving that correlation metric, then you are getting somewhere. So essentially, let's say for Delhi, I know what the air quality is. For Jaipur, I know air quality because of sensors. I don't know what is the air quality in like a village, like let's say Neemrana, which is between Delhi and Jaipur. Do citizens of Neemrana have no right to know what their air quality is? No. But then can a government or any agency put air quality sensor everywhere? Again, no, it's expensive. So, and then why are all these satellites up in the air? See, there are about 700 plus Earth observation satellites. Every single space mission across US, Europe, India, Japan invests billions of dollars into this work. So that data is coming nonetheless. You might as well put that data to use. And if you merge and correlate and sort of mishmash this ground sensor data with satellite data, that's where you're talking about like a lot of powerful insights.
So what I get it from here is that you need ground data to make sure that there is good high resolution data, while you need satellite data to make sure that generalization can be done in a better way, and then you merge it in the best possible way.
Essentially.
And you have already mentioned a lot of consumers on private side. What do you see as the government side? What kind of consumers can come into play for such kind of
Every
service?
government would become a consumer. I can say it with quite a lot of confidence, simply because the quality of what we're doing is really good. And that's what we're focusing on. The problem with government consumers often is that it's a very long cycle of engagement. You all are not really the fastest people on the planet. So it's just a lot of like persuasion and so on and so forth. So the strategy that at least I am personally taking is wow the people, and then so we don't want to chase you. We'll build it up. We have that sort of self-confidence, and it's quite gut-punching to constantly have that level of self-confidence. It's very difficult. But what we are banging on is that it's essentially like Google, right? Like, we'll build this up, and then we know that tomorrow you'll come to us because it's going to be such a fantastic product. So let's say if you're government of Punjab, Haryana, Bihar, you will come to us because you will want to know what the flood predictions are, what the groundwater levels are, what the temperatures are, what the air quality are. You will need this information, and instead of us chasing you, it's going to be a little other way around. The other problem and challenge is that governments typically operate with this tender ecosystem of individual softwares for every small problem statement, and that's extremely inefficient from just a development perspective, because then Bihar is producing the same thing which Punjab is producing, which is Jharkhand is producing. That's not how, imagine this is, what happened before Slack. I'll give you an example. Before Slack, every other company used to have their own internal messaging systems. And they would reach out to some Nukkadwali IT company and put out a tender or put out a thing for them to make a messaging system for them. And then Slack came, and Slack made a messaging system which a lot of people could just go on, and Slack became a multi-billion-dollar company. So that's our approach, which is that dhan rakho, we'll make our thing, and then a lot of governments across India, across municipal level, state level, central level, who will work with us, will work with our products and data sets. And not just that, I hope at international level, governments will work with us.
That's amazing. And so then again, coming to another aspect of it, which is open data sources that are now coming up, especially with innovation and everything being the buzzword. There is a huge need of open data set. A lot of people are doing it. And where do you see yourself on those lines? What do you see happening on those lines?
So we've definitely committed ourselves to making certain part of data sets at certain resolution and certain volume open for anybody, especially for student, developer, and researcher community, simply because more the younger people and students and developers play with satellite data, more they will understand and get interested in it. And there is just so much applications that and innovation that can come out of it that I can't even imagine today. So to obviously enable that system, but it's some just imagine like a tap. So from my data tap, if you want to take one glass of water, it's for free. But if you want to take 1 gallon, I'm going to charge you for that. So it's essentially like that. And if you want to take a gallon every hour, I will charge you a lot for that. So, but 1 glass or 2 glasses is always for free. Same thing if you look at resolution wise, at a higher resolution, let's say a city level or a district level or a state level, you make that data available for free or very subsidized cost. But higher the resolution goes, data becomes more expensive. And there it finds more applications with private sector or with government. So we definitely would want to work much more in the open data domain. Let's see, this is as we build the data sets and as things go out in the public. With Breezo or with air quality data, you can see that quite a lot of it is public. And ironically, before 2018, when we first put together that 2006 to 2018 time series, nobody had put it together. There was no way. The reason why we put it together was simply because we wanted to see. It was not even for anybody else. It was I want to know how has air pollution changed in, let's say, this one location in ITO where government started monitoring from 2006 to 2018. Can I get that time series anywhere? No. So it's a very basic demand, right? And a lot of people do refer to Breezo, and we have pretty reasonably good traffic on the website. We haven't been working actively on it, but hopefully, in future, some of these assets that we are producing will become the go-to asset in India and globally for referring to environmental information.
Okay. So you just mentioned that you want more and more students to work with satellite data. You want them to be more used to this kind of data to make sure that they learn from it as well. And this is one thing I feel that your company also tries to encourage, that it does not matter what you have studied or what you have done. If you work on it, if you want to work on it, you can do it. So how do you see that kind of market evolving in future, especially with now everything going online but not offline? So the whole education sector is getting online. Do you really feel that there is any more requirement of degrees or anything, or you just know coding come in, or you just know certain skill set come in and go forward with it?
Okay, so I have 7 years of education and 3 degrees and couple of diplomas. So and my brother / co-founder is 12th pass actually. No degree, college dropout. I would say that there is obviously role of education on certain topics, definitely. But I don't have the best words to say about Indian education system. I would say my 5 years were pretty wasted. I didn't really learn anything. So where we stand as a company is that we don't judge you for your educational background, for your degree, brand name. It really doesn't matter. You come as who you are, and you can be from an IIT or a Yale and not get a job with us, and you can be from no college and get a job with us. But I think in future, see, one major thing that has happened since 2000s, early 2000s, that we fail to recognize is that information has become completely democratized. So you can actually access whatever the hell in the world you want to know on the World Wide Web. You do not need your teachers to actually explain it to you anymore. That said, there are some concepts which are pretty complex, and I've got an amazing education at Yale, and I would just never undermine it. And I would still go back. If there is no way that I'll be I'll learn all of these things from the internet. Often it also involves a lot of interpersonal skills, a lot of morality, ethics, and some of those philosophical concepts that you really don't always get on the World Wide Web. So that's there. So there's going to be a room for high quality education, but when it comes to understanding a certain piece of information or something, you just it doesn't matter. And I think in future, education will really have to evolve itself. It's very stuck in 1970s, and companies like us do not really value it. We've interviewed a lot of candidates who spent quite significant amount of money in diplomas in data analytics or something. And one of the questions we always have for them is that, hey, instead of spending that money and that time in that classroom, had you done a free and open source project of your own for 1.5 years or something, 1 year, where do you think you would have reached? And do you think you would have been much more employable for us? Because you would have figured out, like, see, some of those quality, especially when you're working in a very innovative segment like we are doing. None of us knew how to analyze satellite data prior to like January of 2018 when we said we would analyze satellite data. So it was quite, who the hell are you? We learned it all. And a lot of our products were like are based on systems which were being developed as we were doing it. So let's say Timescale DB, we were the 22nd customer. So Timescale DB itself was in a beta form and nowhere. So we were reading some of those documentation. By we, I mean the tech team was reading some of those documentation as they were developing the product. Or let's say Notion, we onboarded on Notion in 2018 when very few people in the world were using Notion, and Notion had this place where you can chat and like, request features. Can you please add this as a feature on Notion? So like the word count, I had texted, it's like, hey, can you please add word count because I need to know it? And they're like, oh, cool, definitely. See, so when you come in the very cutting edge innovation domain, nobody knows anything and you have to really understand that. So all of your education and everything goes out for a toss. And then it becomes like, what can you learn? How persistent are you to bang your head against some documentation? How can you reach out to one obscure geospatial data scientist in like Luxembourg to figure out something and to figure out something? So it becomes a lot about like very fundamental capabilities of basic analysis, basic mathematics, quantitative skills, persistence. Just, it takes you away from all of this, universities and brand names and what you've studied in your classroom to a completely different domain. Now, if you want to, let's say, in your classroom, they taught you how to do financial modeling, Excel 101, and you want to keep on doing exactly that for the rest of your life, then your education is fine. Like, I mean, I studied, clean energy finance, like financial modeling of energy projects. And I could have done that for 20, 25 years. I would have made great money, by the way. It pays a lot of amount. But then, everything that we're doing in Blue Sky, we learn every single day. We learn, we fail, we fall flat on our face. Everything happens, but it's really a lot of fun. Once you get onto this side of, and this is something I feel if in future education system can do, and I don't see a lot of edtech startups in India doing that, which is making kids explorers from a very early on, then you will find like, great things coming out of it. Like, let people explore.
True. I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. And I also believe in the same thing that you need to know how to know things. That is one of the most important skills.
How to figure out how to search on Google is the best skill you will develop. And wasting time at 3 a.m. on Google is like the best thing you will do.
Absolutely. So coming to the next topic is something on space tech. Like, you are working with environmental data. India is opening up space tech as well now. How do you see that kind of system evolving in India? How do you see space technology coming into India? Maybe you entering that space somewhere down the line. I don't know. But how do you see that helping the whole ecosystem?
I mean, there are about 10, 12 great space tech startups in India, and Pixel, SatSure, us. I mean, there's quite a lot of like energy innovation in that ecosystem. It's a small, tiny, but quite a great ecosystem. Our role is obviously around data. So recently we submitted a policy proposal to ISRO and in RSC for given the opening up of the space sector, and we obviously advocated very strongly for open data policy and for more advancing. So not just opening data, but the way you're delivering data to people is also very important. So right now, if you go on ISRO's website or on Bhuvan, it's quite challenging to actually extract those data sets. And for them to make some of those API gateways would be life savior for people like us. But like we definitely look to engage much more with them. Something we realized, we attended a NRSC session right before the lockdown in February or in January. And we were blown away by the kind of research a lot of scientists and sensing people in India have done. So we would definitely want to collaborate much more actively with them. Now, one of the challenges of collaborating with the governmental or the traditional ecosystem that comes for young startups like us is the time and money cost. So unless the time and money cost of that engagement is slightly subsidized, it becomes really expensive. Because, as a startup, you want to exist. You don't want to run out of capital. You want to reach your customers and reach your product market fit rather than always. And, there's a time and mental space that you have to allocate for working with, some of the larger ecosystem at place. So something which would be very great if the government and the space policy system could come up with some basic financial packages for the startups. It could be very small amount. It could be $500,000 or $1 million pool, But what it would do is give us some capital for active engagement with them, without worrying. So let's say if I can hire 3 people who can actively engage with NRSC and I can pay those 3 people's salary, not from the equity funding that I've raised, but from this government grant, then, together we can make significantly more progress. And this is what US and Europe and a lot of countries do actually, because they realize that there is a time value mind space cost for a young startup, which cannot always, a big company like a Google can definitely, they're making billions of dollars in cash. They have a big cash repository. They can just put in $10 million for this engagement. Doesn't, even if it has a 5, 7, 10-year return cycle. In our case, that doesn't always happen. So something along those lines by government would be pretty awesome. But we really want to work with them. Just FYI.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was talking once with my friend as well, who has a manufacturing tech startup, and that was his same intention as well, that we are looking for some kind of grants in this ecosystem because manufacturing is a long process. I believe this is also somewhere not exactly similar, but similar on lines of timeline, that this requires active engagement over years to make sure that such kind of data can be developed. When everyone is still learning about the ecosystem, I feel. And that becomes quite important.
Even some of the tender requirements, for instance, for a startup like ours, the tender requirements of European Space Agency are much more compatible and easy than the tender requirements of ISRO or the Indian government or any Indian government agency. So when they do something in the space of, let's say, they're doing some satellite data analysis for flood mapping in Assam, let's say, and they need a company which has 100 crore turnover. Dude, you're likely to get a company which has existed for 10 years and likely is operating on a archaic, relatively old technology system. Or even if they're doing great work, definitely that tender is not coming to somebody like us and is not enabling us younger, kids to figuring out, who are often like figuring out better, more efficient, more optimized ways of doing things. So it's definitely not coming to us. Sometimes I think relaxing those tender requirements would also be there. The other major thing is that Indian governmental ecosystem and tender ecosystem is very locked in IT project system. Right? You have to move from that IT project to product. Okay, we have created Infosys, TCS, and everything, which are multi-billion-dollar companies, but nowhere does their market cap compare remotely to a Zoom or a Slack or a Google or anything like Zoom or Slack. Nowhere. So you have, because what happens with project is same thing. You do it again and again. You don't appreciate replicability. You are not creating something which is really replicable across multiple use cases. And that's what, if we do as a product company, we are not able to serve the government clients or even the non-profit clients because they're so logged in that project mindset. Like Delhi government wants a project. UP government wants a project. Arey sir, my product is good for both of you. Just buy this product. Just swipe your credit card. It's going to cost you 1/10, 1/20th, in cases 100th of going to IT company and getting this custom thing made for yourself. It's going to cost you a fraction. So there is a mindset problem as well there.
I'm not sure, but I think somewhere on those lines, some of the missions in government are working on those lines, that they are building up GEM portal, I feel, which might again improve this whole ecosystem, that you don't have to go through the tendering process all the time. And I hope slowly and slowly that also improves so that it can work out best for everyone, I feel. Startups as well as government, it's a quite needed requirement. Uh,
Yeah.
so then coming to, where do you see in Indian scenario, how will Blue Sky frame itself in next 10 to 20 years? Where do you see, and what kind of products and services you guys would be in? I know this is still quite far off. You guys are a young company, but something on those lines will at least help us understand how does the future of environmental data look.
10 to 20 years is a long time. We have
Yeah.
a 5-year very clear roadmap for us. No, we most likely will provide you through APIs. That's going to be the method of delivery from us. So just like, weather.com or AccuWeather has an API, and
Yeah.
of Fortune 500 companies, I think half of them are the customers. Yeah, you lots and lots of different people from Indian government, private sector, individuals will just subscribe to our APIs for variety of use cases. It could be like to give some information on your Fitbit or your air purifier, for your insurance claim, whatever application it is. And that's the simple Blue Sky business model. We give you data, you give us money. And we will work quite a lot. So we've decided that whatever visuals and everything that we're doing, so we're building something called Space Time, where we will be loading most of our data so that you can have a sense of what this data is about and it's like. Because if I give you an API, it's just a bunch of numbers, right?
Yeah.
You need to see what those numbers are. And Space Time, we will really promote as an open sort of tool, open libraries that people across the country can use. And we also hope to work quite deeply in the publishing scientific papers. So we would want to publish a lot of scientific papers which back the credibility of the data sets, which are visualized on an open software, open platform, not a software, just an open website. And the data sets are a moat, and lots of people buy them. Whether it's air, water, land, heat. And hopefully, our main goal is to be able to accelerate a system of climate action. So that is the main goal. Hopefully, by looking at some of these higher resolution environmental data, people, individuals, even like the government officials, even the policymakers start to really question their own thesis about climate change, start to, do different kinds of actions, policies, really make the climactic debate in India more data driven rather than sentiment driven. Also, sometimes I think many parties are right. Let's say whether it's the activist side or it's the coal lobby or the government, everybody thinks that they're right. Numbers are numbers, 1+1 will always be 2. So we want all of you to come to numbers, have a look at them, and then be like, okay, this is the way forward. And, I feel the next 15, 20 years for our country and for the planet are very crucial. Essentially, we should be having a very different conversation right now because of how bad climate change really is. And where I stand from, my probability of living to 50 is not very high. That's my understanding of climate data. And since I look at it all the day and evening, I feel I'm kind of relatively correct. So I find it very surprising when people are not scared and anxious. I'm like, wow, you think you're going to live forever? Surprising. Because I don't think, I don't think there's going to be water for me to live, or I don't think that, 10 years from today, I feel the temperature extremes will be really, really extreme, like 54, 55, 56 will not be unheard of. And the world will not be as we know it today. So I hope we can play some role of saving us. I'm not absolutely optimist. I'm trying my best, but I just hope, fingers crossed.
I know what you are saying. I have been through that phase as well. I am now trying to mend my ways into this whole system to make sure that, at least something can be done on those lines to make sure good climate actions are taken into account and we can hopefully take it forward. That is the idea.
Yeah, of 1.3 billion people in the country. Yeah, if we can save a few million more, that's good enough, I would say. I mean, there are 7 billion people on the planet, and we are heading for a 4 degrees Celsius of warming. Already had about 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming. All the reefs are going to be lost. So a lot of people are like, I'm doing my part for the environment, which is kind of nothing. So, hopefully we can show you through numbers and data, like what really needs to be done, and hopefully bring everybody together.
So one of the last questions that I generally have is that what kind of skill sets do you think would be required in coming into the environmental data space? What all things would be required as an employer, employee, whoever anyone wants to be, to make sure that they can have future in this field?
Just the will. Just will. I mean, let's say you're a marketing person. You're a really good marketing person, and you work for Pepsi Cola.
Yeah.
You are factually an environmental criminal enabling an organization to put a lot of plastic in the oceans and Marina Trench and in the bloods and tissues of people. That's what you do. You can tell yourself whatever your job is, but that's what your job is. That's how you're feeding your children. Let's say you work for Facebook and you're a great developer. Let me not entail, but you are using your skill towards destroying a very noble system across the planet, across the world. Right? That's what you're doing. So whatever your skill you have, you can direct it into something else. You can be a marketing person for, there's a great brand called Coco Gusto, which has made a washing detergent, which is biodegradable, coral friendly, environmental friendly, run by this amazing girl. You can work with her. You can leave your job at PepsiCo paying you 20 lakhs, because most likely you do not need those 20 lakhs for living. Most likely Shan Lalwani, she'll give you like 6-7 lakhs for sure. You can work for her, right? Yeah. Similarly, if you're a developer in Facebook, destroying democracy as we know it, you can leave your $150,000, $200,000 job from the valley, move to Gurgaon, work with me. I don't pay bad. I pay pretty well, So it's not about the skill. It's actually just about the will. What is your will for? What do you want to work for? And almost everybody who's working in a sort of, polluting job or planet destroying job today, whether it's Nestle, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Unilever, Coal India Limited, NTPC, I can keep on naming Schlumberger. I mean, when I was 22 years old, I got a very hefty job package in an oil company. And it was paying me almost 20 lakhs plus. And I was only 21 years old. Okay. I don't know, I'm not saying that I did a noble thing, but somehow in the back of my head at a very early age, I was 21 years old. I was like, no, I don't want to do this. And I took a job paying 6 lakhs per annum. I used to get 47,000 rupees at Jameel Poverty Action Lab.
Yeah.
Right. I literally had the best 10 years of my career after undergraduate, making 1/3 the money as most of my contemporaries. Most of my classmates with the same levels of grades, same level of performance or resume were making 3 times the money as me at the age of 23. Yeah. They did not go to Yale on a full scholarship. So the karma comes back. I did not make money, but I literally used to get money to study in the best university from the best professors in one of the best ecosystems ever. Yeah. You can keep your money from Schlumberger. Keep it. So it's on a lot of these individuals to decide what their careers is about, what their lives is about. Is their life about enabling a plastic industry or the big oil? And I'm not saying that they're evil or something, but something we have to realize is it's inertia. Everybody wants a secure job. Yeah. Only an established company will offer you a secure job. Most of the startups are people who don't know what the hell they're doing. We are as clueless as you are. So it's very trusting, big leap. If you choose to leave this, and if you choose to work here, you will create a change. But because of security or settling or whatever, you are choosing to lock your career and by design the entire planet in this old inertial system. Pepsi Cola is an innovation from 1970s. Yeah. 2020, we are still you're marketing Pepsi still in 2020. Go market something new for God's sake. Right. So it's all about the will of the people. And I think the second part is consciousness. Very few people, everybody likes to call themselves environmentalist and blah, 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 all the good adjectives. But when they look, if you were to look at your own personal life, your own lifestyle, your own job, what you do for a living, how you make money, you'll find you have blood on your own hands. So, guys, be critical of your own selves before you're being critical of like big corporations, because you are big corporations.
Yeah. And any last comments do you have on if we have missed out on something or you would like to cover it?
I feel climate action is like the next big thing. Blue Sky is going to be $1 billion company, and there's going to be tons and tons of, because fundamentally, if we were to exist, if we were not to go extinct, by 2035, all the businesses that are present today will look very different. All the services, whether it's mobility, whether it's delivery, whether it's data, whatever it is that you do on a day-to-day basis, you interact with, is going to look fundamentally quite different if we were to survive, right? Now, somebody has to take us from 2020 to 2035. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are needed, a lot of engineers, a lot of developers, marketeers, communication people, growth hackers, every job that you can think of, who have to make this transition happen.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be a super smooth transition. If 100 people try, 95 will fail, 5 will succeed, and tomorrow, we'll have systems which will be very different. And this happens all the time. This is a process of creative destruction that great economists have talked about. And over the last, 20 years, brands have gone away and new brands have come. Businesses have disappeared and have gone bankrupt, and new businesses have emerged. So today, when the market cap of Apple, Google, Amazon is at an all-time high, something to think about. And there is a great talk about this topic by Aswath Damodaran, who's a great economics professor at Stern. You can refer to that. Companies run their lifetime, and then they effectively either, just like what happened to a GE, they go from all-time high stock value to $11. I don't know what it is today. And that's the time when new companies emerge, because there's a new way of life. There's a new technological shift happening, new consumer demand or consumer preference is shifting. Yeah. So 2020 is that time for where consumer preferences are shifting and people want climate action. Now you got to figure out how to deliver it to them. So do it. Come join Blue Sky Analytics.
Thank you, Abhilasha. It was surely a very insightful conversation about environmental data and a lot many more other things. I'm sure our audience would have enjoyed understanding the future and what environment holds for them in the future. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Puneet. Thanks for asking some really good questions, actually.
You have been listening to Understanding the Future podcast. To know more about Climate Center for Cities, visit us at www.c-q.niua.org and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. The show is conceptualized, hosted, and produced by Punit Gandhi. You can listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. Thank you and stay tuned for the next episode.